Sixth grade, this is Mr. Cummings, and I am here to tell you about the 6 books that you have to choose from for your book club this 6 weeks. The first book is Refugee by Alan Gratz. It tells the story of 3 different children who lived during 3 different time periods in 3 different countries. But what they have in common is this idea of being a refugee, of being fleeing one country for another. The first boy, Joseph, lives in Germany in 1938. His family is Jewish, and the Nazis have taken over in Germany. So after the Nazis break down the door of his apartment and arrest his father, they know that they have to do something to try and get out while they can. The next story is a girl named Isabel who lives in Cuba in the 1990s when people are starving because things are economically so hard. There's a lot of unrest, people rioting and protesting against Castro. And when her father gets targeted by the police and she knows he's going to be arrested, they too have to try and get out. They find a neighbor who has built basically a homemade raft out of trash that's going to try and get in this raft from Cuba across the ocean to Florida. And so these 2 families decide that they're going to try to make this very dangerous trip to get to the United States. And lastly, there's this boy named Mahmoud who lives in Syria. And all of the warfare and battling that's been going on in Syria, so many civilians that have been killed. This boy is terrified every day walking to school with his brother that they're going to get shot, that a bomb's going to go off and kill them. And when a bomb does go off one day and blows off the wall of their apartment, putting his brother basically in shock and almost killing all of them, their dad decides that they also have got to get out while they can. And so in all 3 of these, families make these long, very dangerous, life-threatening journeys to try and get from the country they were born in to another country where they hope that they will be safer and have a better life. The second book is Bud Not Buddy by Christopher Paul Curtis. Bud Not Buddy is a story of a boy named Bud who is growing up during the Great Depression. Bud Not Buddy is a really funny book. I laughed the whole way through because this kid is telling what happens in his own words, and he is a funny kid, and these crazy things that he gets into and the crazy ways that he describes things and says to people, it really made me laugh. But it was also kind of a touching story. The kid is an orphan. He grew up, or he lived with his mom and loved his mom very much until his mom passed away. And so now, in the Depression, when people already don't have much, Bud is in an orphanage trying to find a new home. He doesn't really have much to his name other than an old battered suitcase that he keeps his few things that he's managed to carry with him, things that belong to his mom, things that were precious to him. So at the beginning, he gets taken in by a foster family. It's a real bad situation. The boy that he is in the home that he gets taken into is a big bully, and he gets in a fight with this kid, and they lock him in a shed, and he thinks he's going to get attacked by vampire bats, so he manages to bust out and escape. But he doesn't know where to go. Well, when his mom was alive, she had these papers that she kept in the top of her dresser that he would see her sometimes get out and look at like it was something really precious to her. So he looked at them, and what they were flyers for a band called Herman E. Calloway and his Dusky Devastators of the Depression, who would play around Michigan where they live. So he's like, why would my mom have kept these? These were like flyers from different towns he played in. Why would this have been something so important to her? And he decides that he thinks that this guy is his dad. His mom never told him who his dad was. She would never talk about his dad. But he convinces himself that this guy is his dad. So he sets off that night after he escapes from this foster home to try and make it to Flint, Michigan. Now, it's not a short trip, and I don't know how he thinks he's going to get there in the middle of the night. But to find this guy, Herman Calloway, and tell him, hey, you're my dad, take me in, which, of course, does not go exactly like he planned it to. The third book is Freak the Mighty by Rodman Philbrick. Freak the Mighty tells the story of a boy named Max. Max is a kid who's really big for his age, a big, strong kid. But Max is a little bit slow and doesn't do well in school and doesn't have a whole lot of friends. He's kind of a little bit of a loner. In the summer before his 8th grade year, he sees somebody moving into the house across the street. And he notices this unusual little kid that he sort of remembers from daycare. This kid is very, very small. He obviously has some kind of a physical disability. His head is normal size, but his body is tiny. It's kind of hunched over. He has to walk with crutches. He has braces on his legs. But this kid is very, very smart, super smart. He uses these huge words that nobody even knows what he's saying. And he's also pretty tough. When Max sees him, he's giving the movers a hard time. Watch out with that box, you moron. Be careful, you know. Max ends up going over there later. He sees Kevin, the boy, trying to get something out of a tree, and he can't reach it. Max goes and helps him. And the two end up being super good friends. Together, they say that they make Freak the Mighty. Kevin, the smaller one, gets in the habit of riding on Max's shoulders. He carries him around, and Kevin just is jib-jabbing the whole time while Max walks around with him. And so together they say they make Freak the Mighty. Freak being the small one on top, who's like the super brain, the genius, and then the mighty being Max, who's on the bottom, who is the super strong. So together they have it all. But something is up with Max's father. We don't get the full story, but we know that his father is in jail, that his father did something bad, that his father's nickname is Killer Kane, that the kids make fun of him too. Killer Kane, son. And we find out one day that a number of bad things happen, that Max's dad is about to get out of prison on parole. Max is afraid that his dad is going to come after him. And although his grandparents, who he lives with, are like, no, it's not going to happen. We did a restraining order. He can't come within a mile of this place or he'll get arrested. But Max knows that his dad is going to be determined, is going to come after him. And he does. And Max is put into a very dangerous situation that maybe even Freak the Mighty will not be able to solve. The next book is Esperanza Rising by Pam Munoz Ryan. Esperanza Rising is a story about a girl named Esperanza who was growing up in Aguas Calientes, Mexico during the Great Depression. She lives on a big ranch with her father and her mother and her grandmother, and they are very well off. They have a lot of land and they have grapes which they sell, so they got a lot of money. They have servants that work for them that do everything, cook and clean, and Esperanza doesn't have to do anything much for herself. She doesn't even know how to dress herself because she's always had somebody who's helped her do it. She gets treated like a little princess, and it's about to be her birthday, her 13th birthday, and she's excited because her father always throws her a big birthday party, and she's going to have presents, and her friends are going to come, but unfortunately the day does not go as planned. And when her father goes out to work on the land and doesn't return, they begin to get worried about him. They send a couple of men out to check on him, and they come back with the news that her father has been killed by some bandits who were on their property. So Esperanza and her mom's life is completely turned upside down because the house is left to Esperanza's mother, but all of the land gets left to her father's stepbrother, who's a real shady character. He comes right after her father's funeral and says to her mom, hey, I got a proposition for you. Why don't you marry me, and then you can stay living here, and I'll make life really good for you. And she's like, what are you talking about? No, I'm not going to marry you. And he's like, well, I thought you might say that, but let me remind you that I own the land that your house is on, so I could make things very difficult for you. Think about it and let me know. Well, she tells him, no, there's no way I'm going to marry you. But that night, someone comes and sets their house on fire. And although Esperanza and her mother and her grandmother are able to get out, the house burns down, and they essentially now have nothing because the land doesn't belong to them. That's where all the money came from. And so they are at the mercy of her father's stepbrother. So her mom tells him, all right, I've reconsidered and I will marry you. But really, she's got another plan up her sleeve. And so what she does is she convinces the servants, who are actually going to leave too, to take Esperanza and her with them and to help basically smuggle them into California, where they're going to look for work. So Esperanza, who has been rich, who's had people wait on her all her life, is about to be living on a farm where migrant workers work, where people live in tents, where they work hard, hard, hard all day for very little money. And as things get harder and Esperanza's mother becomes sick, Esperanza has to step up and try to save her mom and save herself in these new circumstances they've found themselves in. And last but not least, we have Peak by Roland Smith. Peak is about this kid named Peak Marcello. What kind of kid is named Peak? The child of mountain climbers, that's who. So Peak lives in New York City, and at the beginning of the book, he's doing something that is really stupid. He is trying to climb the side of the Woolworth building, a skyscraper in New York City. He has this thing that he's done where he climbs skyscrapers and he paints this little tag, which is like a little mountain peak on the side, a little tiny where nobody will see it, but he knows that he's done it. Unfortunately, this time Peak gets caught. The police come in helicopters and they take him off the side of the building. Peak is in big trouble. Even more so after another kid sees about, it's on the news, another kid sees the news story and tries to do it and then falls to his death. They don't want anybody else repeating this, and so they're going to throw the book at Peak. They're going to make an example out of him. He's looking at years. Peak's mom and stepdad, because his mom and real dad divorced when he was young, and he has almost no contact with his dad. His mom and stepdad show up. They manage to convince the judge to let him off on probation, but there's a catch. The judge wants Peak completely gone, out of the public eye. So he's not going to be on the news. He wants him to disappear, basically. So the way that they arrange to make that work is that he's going to go live with his dad in, I believe it's Thailand. Now, again, he doesn't know jack about his dad. He meets his dad in the airport, and he's like, Dad? And the guy's like, don't call me Dad, call me Josh, because I really haven't been a dad to you. And he hasn't. So he goes with Josh, and we figure out pretty soon Josh is up to something. We don't know exactly what. He's making extra stops. He seems to be planning something, but we don't know exactly what it is. Well, what Peak's dad does is he does tours. He still is a great climber, and he leads people on difficult climbs. Like he'll take a group of people to climb a certain mountain or whatever. So Peak's dad has a plan to, instead of going to Thailand like everybody thought, he wants to take Peak to Nepal and have him climb Mount Everest, to the summit of Mount Everest, where he would be the youngest person to ever climb Mount Everest. Wow. Why would he want to do that? It sounds dangerous. It is dangerous. People die all the time trying to climb Mount Everest. That's like, only for super expert climbers. And still the summit to, the path to the summit of Mount Everest, there are dead bodies, people who are frozen who have tried to make it up but have not made it. But Josh seems to see this as an opportunity to promote his business. If he could say that he led the youngest climber up to Mount Everest, that would give him a business, make more people want to come hire him to take them on climbs. So Peak is like, well, this doesn't sound too bad. Mount Everest, that's a climb everybody wants to do, so he agrees to do it. And that's what this book is about, is this whole process that they go through. I didn't know a lot about mountain climbing, but how they plan for, and little at a time, make their way up Everest to each camp and up, finally trying to reach the summit of the mountain. It's a very exciting story. If you have any interest in mountain climbing or how that works, or like outdoorsy stuff, I recommend it because I enjoyed it a whole lot. So that's Peak, and those are the 6 books. Choose wisely.